So we are heading towards the Passion, and we'll hear this in our liturgies later on, in our prayers, and our readings will more and more tend towards and look towards the suffering and death of Jesus on the cross. But for now, we have pointed towards it here in this text, in the Old Testament and in the Gospel here. When Jesus says, he says it was, when you lift me up, when you've lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am He. And that phrase, lifted up, points us back to the first reading from the book of Numbers, where the people of Israel had sinned against the Lord. They had spoken against the Lord and against Moses, and so the Lord sent fiery serpents to them, and their bite brought death. And as a result, they interceded before Moses. Moses was told to make this fiery serpent, this bronze serpent, and that bronze serpent was lifted up. When I am lifted up, then you will know. And so Jesus is pointing back towards this lifted up, this fiery serpent which is lifted up. Now, the lifting up that Jesus is going to do, or is going to be done to him, is the lifting up, as we know, upon the cross. But it's interesting that this text and what Jesus is saying points towards the cross and what happens on the cross, the importance of what happens on the cross. Because in this text, the people of Israel sin. Now, it's important when we read the Old Testament to remember that what we see physically happen in the Old Testament spiritually happens in the New Testament and in the present. So it foreshadows what we experience spiritually now. And so the people of God in that text, at that time, they rejected God. They sinned. They spoke against God and against Moses. That was their sin. The punishment was these fiery serpents which brought death when they bit people. And so the important thing for us to remember is that it is sin which kills. Sin always brings death. And so when we reject God, the people of God spoke against God and Moses. They rejected God. And when we reject God, when we sin, that brings death. Moses is the one who foreshadows Jesus. He's a type of Jesus. He does what Jesus does as I said, the Old Testament foreshadows what we see happen in the Old Testament in physical ways, happens in spiritual ways. So Moses is like Jesus. He's brought the people out of slavery through the waters of the Red Sea and led them to the Promised Land. This is what Jesus does in reality, and he fulfills and makes that complete. And just as Jesus intercedes for his people, Moses is the one who foreshadows that by interceding for the people who are dying. The people plead for their lives for Moses. Intercede for us. And this is what we do with Jesus. Intercede for us. Lord, we need your help. We are unable to do it by ourselves. If we continue as we are, Lord, we are going to die because we keep rejecting not only you, but reject you in our neighbor. And Lord, I harm myself by the way I act, by the way I speak, by what I do. So, Lord, I need you. And Jesus is the intercessor who intercedes for us before the Father. And his greatest work of intercession is him laying down his life on the cross. It's interesting. This is him being raised up. And when God, the strange thing is that God tells Moses to fashion an image of a living creature, a serpent, not to worship it as God. The second commandment: you shall not form graven images and worship them. He's told to form a graven image, not to worship, but to look at it. And whoever looks at it with faith will be saved. The serpent, think about what the serpent is. The serpent is that thing which kills the people of God. It brings death. Sin brings death. And so Moses has this serpent, bronze serpent made. Sin, the bronze serpent, is raised up. And when the people of Israel look at what has been raised up, they live. And Jesus, when he is laid on the cross, he becomes sin for us. That which kills us, kills the people of God, the serpents, the fiery serpents, which brings death, that is raised up. Sin. Jesus becomes sin, which kills us and kills him. And so when we look at he who has been raised up, he who has become sin, this, in a sense, looking back towards the bronze serpent, Jesus is the fulfillment of that. When we look to him at the cross in faith, he who died for us, he who interceded for us, who took our death upon himself. When we enter into this mystery, when we enter into this mystery, we die with him. The old person of sin who has been bitten by the serpent, the old man dies, and we are raised to new life in him. This is the gift of the Eucharist. This is the gift of Jesus Christ for us. We need to recognize that we've been bitten by the serpent. We have to recognize that we are dying, that the poison of the serpent is killing us. And look up to he who has been lifted up, that we might be saved.